Withrow, let me bring you in. There are a lot of different stories I want to get into with you, but let's start off here with one of the kind of wacky stories so far from the NFL, and hasn't gotten a ton of attention, but Vic Beasley is a rush defensive end, and he's just kind of gone disappearing act on the Titans. They paid him $9 million a year. He hasn't officially opted out. What in the world is going on here?
It's a strange story, Clay. And in fact, he had a truck delivered to his house, I think, yesterday or 2 days ago. That's the one thing we've seen from him. And John Robinson, Titans GM, said he spoke with him and that Vic Beasley's aware that his absences are inexcused and that he should be there shortly, was the word from John Robinson. It's a crazy story. You know, I think if the Titans are a little bit more high-profile nationally, it's probably getting covered more by the Adam Schefters and Jay Glazers of the world. But it's just so strange because no one really knows anything. Mike Vrabel was asked about it, and he said he hasn't talked to Vic Beasley. So he knows exactly what the media knows, that he's just not showing up. We know that he had a death in the family a week or two ago, but certainly that wouldn't prevent him from telling the Titans what his plan is and showing up to camp. So it's a very strange story. I expected him to opt out, and that did not happen. So very weird, and I guess we'll continue to monitor. But it's a huge blow to the Titans because right now, if they don't get Jadeveon Clowney, that was their key offseason acquisition to help that pass rush, and he's not there, and he's AWOL.
Yeah, that's pretty wild in general, that storyline. I want to go into like the college universe. I know you're not college age, and neither am I. But if you were 20 years old and you were showing up on a college campus, is there any way you would make smart decisions as it relates to the coronavirus when you were back on campus?
Absolutely not. The only way I would make a smart decision, Clay, is if I was such a great prospect in football or basketball that I needed to play an entire season, or I was a borderline guy that needed to get drafted. That might be the one thing that would motivate me to not make dumb decisions. And look, these teams are going to do everything in their power to educate the players, to keep them away from frat parties, to do all these things. But there's going to be players that go to frat parties. There's going to be players that go to packed bars or whatever it may be. There's no avoiding that on a college campus. And I think the biggest thing out there that a lot of people really don't cover or talk about, you know, we hear the stories about the Pac-12 uniting and trying to boycott this season if they don't have their demands met. When we see the stories from places like HBO Real Sports about the players that are afraid of dying and their parents that are afraid of dying with the NCAA, we don't hear about the 75 to 80%, and I believe that number, again, I'm guessing, but I believe it to be close to accurate, the 75 to 80% of college-age people in America that don't care about the virus and aren't afraid of it. And that's probably 75 to 80%, maybe even greater than that, of athletes out there. So how can you convince someone that's not worried about something and not worried about getting it to completely shut down and do nothing? I think it's an impossibility for these college programs.
I think that's the biggest challenge to college football coming back. And everybody out there listening to me knows that I want all sports back. But I don't think it is the coronavirus itself that is the challenge, because I think we've proven that you can manage it if you make smart decisions, certainly if you implement a bubble, even if you just make decent decisions. Like even in Major League Baseball, we've really only had 2 teams that have had issues with the coronavirus so far. And only one of those teams, the Marlins, and I'll get to the Marlins here in a minute, actually have had a substantial enough impact that it's become a massive story in the Major League Baseball universe in general. But I just don't see any way, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't see any way that your average college athlete is going to be disciplined enough or fearful enough, right? Because I think they know that they are unlikely to have significant issues from the coronavirus. And so I just don't buy into that if there's a cute girl who texts you and says, hey, we're going to this location, that there are very many 18 and 19-year-old, 20-year-old guys who aren't going to show up there, right? I just feel like it's almost impossible to stop from happening.
I mean, there's very few 40-year-old guys that would show up.
Well, that's true. That's right.
Much less 18, 19, and 20-year-old guys. So you're right, Clay. And that, to me, that's the biggest factor in this that people don't really want to talk about. But it's the fact that most young people in college aren't afraid of coronavirus. They're not afraid of getting it. and it's not a big enough deterrent for them to not do what they want. So, again, I think it's impossible to make every football player stay in and stay in their own bubble and do all of that. There's going to be a lot of responsible players that do that over the course of a season. They can suck it up for 4 months and do that, but there's going to be a great majority of them that do not. And all it takes is one, as we've seen with some team outbreaks, it takes one or two people to spread it, and then you have an issue. And then the question becomes, what is the number of people with the virus to shut down a team for a week or for a season? Because and I'll speak for the SEC, what the SEC wants is to put on a product in their television schedule. They want to put on 3.5, 4 hours of a game so they can fulfill their television schedule, because ultimately they're all going to take a bath this year, but that at least helps negate some of that if they can get the season in. So what if there's 25 players out? What if your starting quarterback and 4 of the 5 offensive linemen and 5 defensive starters are out for a team, and you're going up against a completely healthy team? Well, there are health and safety issues when you're starting 7 walk-ons, for instance, against Alabama or LSU. And this is one of those unintended consequences that no one thinks about. So will there be a threshold? Will teams decide they can't go because they have so many guys out with the virus? I think that's going to be interesting to follow, because I would think that Greg Sankey and the SEC is talking to every single team and saying, if there's any way that we can get the games in, let's do it. It's so much less this year to me about wins and losses, and so much more about just fielding a product on Saturdays that you could put on television. And that's the ultimate goal of the SEC now.
I don't think there's any doubt. You know a lot more about high school football, and you pay a lot more attention to it than I do. But I think we're approaching 40 different states that have said, hey, basically we're going to have a high school football season. And certainly the NFL is doing everything in their power on the pro level to play. How do you think it impacts college football if we've got the NFL playing and if we've got high school football playing? And do you believe we will have, because, again, you cover a lot of high school football in the state of Tennessee, but also are privy to what's going on around the nation more than I am. Do you think we're going to have, quote-unquote, normal high school football seasons in many states?
I think that we will have a normal high school football season in many states. Now, I also think that, and I'll just look in the state of Tennessee, Greenville High School in East Tennessee, a really good program. They've had to completely shut it down for 2 weeks because they had such a bad outbreak on their team once they started full contact practice. They've canceled their first game of the year, which is scheduled for August 21st. So now you've got their opponent in Powell out of Knoxville, who is trying to find an opponent. You're going to have a lot of that, Clay, I think, across the country. You're going to have a lot of teams that have to shut it down for a week. They have to cancel a game. In Metro Nashville, you've got public schools that aren't allowed to play until after Labor Day. You've got private schools basically doing whatever the hell they want and going against the mayor and going into Williamson County and playing games, or Rutherford County, and they're going all over the state, and they're going out of state to play games. So I think you're going to have a lot of jostling once the seasons begin, and teams that are healthy or are willing to play are going to have to find a dance partner week to week. Maybe another team that had a game canceled because the team they were playing had an outbreak of the virus. There's going to be a lot of maneuvering throughout the season, but I do fully expect that most of these states that are allowing high school football to be played will finish the season. It's just not going to look like a normal season by the end of it.
Here's an interesting point that I had talking with a couple of people around high school and football and college and pros and comparing it. They said, and I thought this was really intriguing, and I'm curious if you've talked or thought about this. They said high school football has a huge advantage in getting played. And I said, what in the world do you mean? You know, like these are young kids, everything else. And the point was, and I think it's a good one, they aren't going to test very often. Only when guys are symptomatic and they recognize, oh my God, this guy's sick, and now we've got to test a bunch of people around this guy, are they going to even know when they have an outbreak on the team? Whereas you use Major League Baseball as an example right now, I haven't heard any of the Marlins players, really, that they even knew they would have been sick, but they're testing so regularly that when they have an asymptomatic player, they find out, and then they find out all these other guys are asymptomatic. For high school football, you could have a lot of asymptomatic players playing. It could be spreading through the team. Nobody even knows they have it unless they're going and regularly getting tested, which isn't happening because most places testing is expensive. And so as a result, they were like, I feel pretty good about high school football playing we're not going to necessarily know about the asymptomatic kids. Whereas in the college, because of the aggressive testing policy, I think the SEC has announced they're testing 3 days a week. And the NFL, with their aggressive testing policy, everybody who's asymptomatic is going to be found, which could lead to those teams having to shut down.
I've thought about this a lot, Clay, and I think you're dead on when you say that. I think they're going to have a much better chance because of the ignorance of it, the ignorance is bliss type deal with high school football, where they're just not going to know. If a lot of the young people, and what we've seen, a lot of younger people are asymptomatic. So if they're asymptomatic, they're not going to know who has it. Maybe they practice for a week and then they don't have it a week later, and then it's a non-issue. Now, the TSSAA is regulating, and I can just speak for the state of Tennessee, and I'm sure every other state has their own protocols in place. You have to have your temperature taken every day to enter the practice field,
right,
or to go play in a game. So that's the one where, again, we're talking about symptoms, though, right?
Yes.
They'd have to be running some
which is
sort
a
of
small
fever
percentage of the athletes that are actually getting flagged actually have symptoms at all. The vast majority of people who are young and are testing positive for the coronavirus would never know they had it but for the positive test.
And I think that that's going to be what's going to keep high school football alive. Now, here's the issue. You know, you've got these small rural high schools all over the country, and they may have 20 players, 24 players on their team. Those are the ones most likely to have seasons shut down if something happens. But those are also the schools most likely to not follow any of these protocols because they can't, because they may not even have the option of checking everyone's temperature every day of practice, right? They're going to be much more – they're not going to be as capable of some of the bigger programs across the country of putting in place the protocols that the state high school associations are asking of their teams. So it's sort of a catch-22 when you look at it. Yes, some of those smaller programs are more in danger of you have 8 guys who are out and you can't play a game that Friday night. But also, I don't think they're going to be following the protocols like some of the bigger programs, both public and private across the country. So many different ways to look at this. But I think you're onto something in saying that because they're not going to be testing as much as college and pro football, that high school football has a much better chance of surviving this fall.
We're talking to Chad Withrow at Withrow Zone on Twitter, 104.5 The Zone in Nashville. I know you're a big Major League Baseball fan. This weekend, we're going to get to, for many teams, 25% of the season being complete. On this show, I've been praising Rob Manfred over this issue. It would have been really easy last week for him to say, okay, I'm going to panic when the Marlins come out and then we add the Cardinals and everything else and just say we're shutting everything down or maybe we're pausing everything. To his credit, I think he's powered through. 2-part question. How much are you enjoying watching Major League Baseball every night? And how much credit does Rob Manfred deserve for staring down all of the criticism and saying, I'm not a quitter, we're going to continue to play?
Well, I was enjoying it a lot more before Mike Soroka of my Braves, their ace, tore his Achilles and is out for the next 12 months. So that hurts them. But, no, I'm loving it, Clay. It's one of those that it feels so natural. You don't even notice the no crowd there because of the piped-in noise in the ballparks. It just feels like you're watching a random weeknight Major League Baseball game, and it's glorious getting a chance to watch that. And I think baseball is going to be fine. You know, they're the one they're at the biggest risk, unlike hockey and NBA with their bubbles. And those two sports are definitely going to be fine when you look at the testing and everything going on there. But I think it's very encouraging that you had the Marlins go head-to-head with the Phillies with double-digit guys with COVID-19, and not one Philly tested positive.
Yeah, right.
I think that's good news for the transmission of it outdoors in that sport. So you're going to have more teams like the Cardinals we've already seen and the Marlins have outbreaks, and it may shut them down for 4 or 5 days. But because of this new 7-inning doubleheader rule, there's a lot of chances to make those games up with 2 7-inning games on the same day with doubleheaders. So I think baseball is going to be fine. I think Rob Manfred has made a lot of missteps as commissioner of Major League Baseball. I think baseball looked the dumbest of all the sports in trying to come up with a plan to come back. But I do think that he has handled things pretty well since all of this started. And I think forging ahead right now for baseball and not panicking is certainly the right decision. And we know the NFL is going to forge ahead. But that's one that's too big to fail. They're going to have a season. It's incredible to think about how no one even questions that league happening because you just know that they're going to keep playing and have a season no matter what.
So you're a big Braves fan. My 9-year-old has turned into a huge Braves fan, and every night in our house we have the Braves on, starting at a little bit after 6 Central. We watch the games, at least have them on in the background. Baseball is great in that way. You can be doing multiple other things and kind of look up every now and then to pay attention, but he's pretty plugged in. He has been arguing that I should join him in becoming a Braves fan. You have young kids right now. I grew up a Reds fan. I'm not really, back in the day when I was 15, 16 years old, Barry Larkin, Chris Sabo, Eric Davis, I was all in as a Reds fan. But I can honestly say I don't really have any strong affinity whatsoever now for the Reds because it's been 20 years. I haven't really committed to it. How would you assess my ability as a 41-year-old man to pick a new favorite baseball team, which happens to be your favorite team as the Braves, so that I can watch and root alongside of my 9-year-old? Where are the fan ethics as it pertains to this debate?
I think it's, first off, going to be very easy for you to switch from the Reds to the Braves now for a couple of reasons. One, you're not passionate about the Reds anymore like you were when you were a kid, so that has changed. And two, you are passionate about your 9-year-old son.
Right.
So it's going to be very easy to have bonding time with your son watching the team that he loves. And I think that love of that team is going to be contagious. I see this a lot where parents fall in love with a team because their kid loves that team. And they're watching that team all the time with their kid. I could say this about my grandmother with the Chicago Bulls when I was a kid. She would watch me at night, and I'd go to her house, and we'd sit and watch WGN and watch the Bulls. Well, she didn't know anything about the NBA until I came around, and she was a huge Bulls fan. She'd watch the games when I wasn't there. So I think you're going to find yourself at some point, Clay, keeping up with Braves games even when your son's not there. And also, it's a good team to jump onto right now because they have a very exciting and young core that's going to be there for a while. Their starting pitching is very average right now, especially without Mike Soroka. So they're going to have to outscore a lot of teams. But it's a fun team to watch. They've got some personality. They've got some great young players, and those players are locked up for a while. So jump on board now, and I think it'll be easy.
All right, last question for you. You have to choose to only watch one this weekend. This is, what I've been calling August Madness, the greatest collection of sports that maybe we've ever seen for a consecutive series of days. It's like March Madness that Thursday, Friday, except writ large going everywhere, right? So you have to choose. I put this up as a poll question earlier this week, but I'm curious for you. PGA Championship, Major League Baseball games of your choice, NBA games of your choice, or NHL games of your choice. You can only pick one. What's your first-round draft pick going through the weekend? What are you most committed to?
PGA Championship.
Yeah.
I think it's a great question, but I'm going PGA Championship, especially if Tiger Woods can continue to play well.
He had a great Thursday,
TV.
-2.
Yes.
Hopefully on Friday he can stay in the mix. He's probably going to make the cut. Knock on wood. We don't want him to miss the cut. He'd have to be really bad on Friday in order to not be able to play through on Saturday and Sunday. Had a good Thursday. Hopefully he has a good day today. So you're with me. That's my pick as well. It has to be the PGA.
It's the PGA. I also love watching golf in weather conditions.
Yeah.
And I know the Thursday round was 56 degrees in San Francisco and gray, and you're watching players in long-sleeve shirts out there
It felt
golfing.
a little bit
I
like
love
the
that.
British Open-esque.
Yes. And I love the British Open for the same reason. I enjoy watching golf in the elements. I didn't enjoy the Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Tiger Woods, Phil Mickelson deal in the rain. I enjoyed the event, but I don't want weather like that you're playing through. But I do like it where it looks like fall when you're watching guys out there golfing. So I'm going PGA Championship. After that, I'd probably go NHL playoffs, NBA playoffs, Major League Baseball in that order.
Yep. Outstanding last question. I know I said last question. Does Zion, the Pelicans have fallen apart, right? It seems like the NBA tried to rig it for Zion and the Pelicans to be able to make the playoffs. They wanted to get a LeBron James versus Zion playoff series. I think if you gave Adam Silver truth serum, he'd be like, yep, that's why we tried to set it up in the bubble so that we could have this scenario. Does it feel like to you the Pelicans are just saying, hey, we have no interest? When you give up 140 points to the Sacramento Kings, when as good as Zion is, he looks like he's carrying 15 or 20 pounds of extra weight even right now and looks like he labors up and down the basketball court. It looks like they basically mailed it in to me. Do you agree?
Yeah, that's the question they've given up on anything right now. And what happened to the photo of Zion Williamson where he was working
Looked
out
super ripped
during quarantine?
Yeah, it's a great question.
He was ripped, and now you're right. He looks bigger, and he's always been big. But he's the guy that you watch an AAU game, and the guy who can go and score around the basket at any point, but yet always looks completely labored getting up and down the court, and like he's gonna pass out at any time. That's the way he looks every minute he plays since he's come back. It's very odd because it looked like he'd gotten in a lot better shape during the downtime.
Yeah, there's no doubt at all. Withrow, appreciate the time, my man. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the golf tournament. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right, thanks. Same to you.